Welcome into the fourth installment of the CFF Sites preseason preview series. With today, we are looking at the Big 12, and as always, I am joined by my partner Mike. Mike, we've knocked out three conferences already. We've got the Big 12. We'd like to say short but sweet. There's only 10 teams in this conference, but there are a few things that there's a lot of change within the conference at some schools, some programs in regards to coordinators that are really going to turn the offenses on their head. And we're going to get into those today. Any initial thoughts on the Big 12 as we look at it just from a broad perspective? Give it a brief overview before we go team by team.
Look at me. I'm on mute. I mean, Big 12 always exciting with these offenses, and we have some changes at offensive coordinator that might make it even more exciting for particularly us with college fantasy and kind of with Conference USA. Like, this is you mentioned this is short and sweet today, but this is the last time it's going to be short and sweet because we got more turnover in the coming years with the teams being added to this conference.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with that being said, let's just kind of jump into it, because one program where there was not change, there was change last year, but no change this year, and really not one of those offenses that we're super excited about, and that's Lance Leipold's offense over at Kansas, where he changed it last year. A lot of excitement for Devin Neal, but you take a look at this offseason, and they added some depth with Kai Thomas and Sevion Morrison. So for as excited a lot of people were about as they were about Devin Neal last year, kind of worried about what kind of system we're going to get here. Is Neal going to be a workhorse back, or are we going to see maybe just a running back by committee approach, maybe ride the hot hand? What's your thoughts here? I still like Neal the best of these three. I think he's going to get the most work in the backfield. And in my opinion, when you have an offense like they're going to run at Kansas, not necessarily sure you have enough depth, because there's a lot of emphasis at the running back spot.
Yeah. I was looking back at Buffalo, because I remember talking about this last year where everybody was kind of jumping in on Devin Neal, right, as a first round dynasty draft pick. And I was like, okay, it might take a little bit of time for Leipold to get his system implemented, get the talent. I think is more important than the system at a place like Kansas. And, they produced pretty good numbers, particularly at the end of the year. And I look back to Buffalo, and it was staggering almost. They started off in Leipold's first year. They started off pretty well, and they just took a dip that second year. I think it was like 16 points a game. They actually had a 1,000-yard rusher that year, but that offense was terrible. They threw like 12 or 13 touchdown passes. It was really that third year that the Buffalo offense really kind of became that Buffalo offense that we got to know under Leipold. So I don't think actually we have to worry about it. This drop off in year two. They return 76% of their offensive production from last year, 4 starters back in the O-line. And kind of like you said, they're deep in the backfield with Neal and Kai Thomas, who, funny, there's some separation between the running back 1 and the running back 2 in this system, where I think on average it's like 50 carries more for the running back 1 over the backup. But I mean, Kai Thomas, especially with all those injuries last year, proves he's pretty capable in the backfield at Minnesota last year. So interested to see kind of how the carries are divvied out there. And then at quarterback, go ahead.
No. Finish that point.
Yeah, no, I was gonna just hit on quarterback a little bit with Jalen Daniels, because he was really good.
Yep.
The second half of or the last month, I should say, of last year. And I kind of saw a few people touting him up a little bit. I haven't drafted him just because I don't, what do I care about a Kansas quarterback typically? But I mean, he had 33 fantasy points against Texas. I think he had 29 against maybe West Virginia. So, I mean, this is a guy who, he's talented, definitely not built the same way as a Tyree Jackson. Remember him from Buffalo a few years back? I mean, Jalen Daniels is only 6 feet tall, about 200 pounds, but Jackson averaged around 25 fantasy points in back-to-back years at Buffalo. So I'm curious to see if he ends up becoming a relevant option at quarterback.
It's interesting. We're spending quite some time on Kansas here just to kick off the conference. The one thing, and you and I talk about this from time to time when we're talking about fantasy value, that concerns me more about Kansas and drawing comparisons to Leipold's Buffalo teams, is that Kansas still looks to be, at least on paper right now, still the worst program in the conference, right? Whereas Buffalo was always middle to upper tier of the MAC. And so you just wonder sometimes, when they're playing sometimes the Texases or the Oklahomas or Oklahoma States, as you mentioned, Daniels had some big games. If they're behind trailing in those games, does it really give them a chance to establish the running game, which is sort of the calling card of Leipold's offenses over 4 quarters? And that's why I'm still a little concerned right now about the Kansas offense and investing really. For me, I'm not really investing any draft capital right now into the Kansas backfield, but I know that players like Devin Neal can be had on the cheap later on in the back end drafts. And, it's not worth, it's worth a shot at that particular point from a value standpoint, because we're not seeing any guys from this squad or this program going off in mid rounds of any drafts that we're in.
Yeah, I think in standard drafts, you can get Devin Neal as your, maybe RB3, probably best as RB4. Kai Thomas, even in this 35 round best ball that I'm in, he's not being drafted. And while we project Neal to be the starter, I mean, Kai Thomas is going to get a heavy dosage of carries. Maybe he even turns out to be the starter. You don't know for sure at this point. So, yeah, I mean, you get these guys late, you're not doing heavy draft capitals. So, and then Jalen Daniels just kind of week to week, maybe waiver wire pickup, given the matchup.
Let's go jump over to TCU, Mike, where for me and for you, a lot of the talk has been the at quarterback, right? Who's going to go ahead and lead this offense? We know that they have some weapons, at least a very good weapon at Quentin Johnston at receiver, which you and I are both high on this year. But we look at Chandler Morris and we look at Max Duggan, and we wonder if either of those guys are just a great fit for the system. I think both of us would probably say they're not, but the question is, are they going to look to go into the season with these two guys? Would they add someone late? I don't know. This one makes me nervous. It almost feels like in the drafts, this is a handcuff situation. You draft one, you almost have to take two, particularly in best ball drafts. Where are you at with TCU right now?
Yeah, I wish I had Chandler Morris's ADP up right now. I don't, but you said you're nervous about the quarterback competition. I think a lot of people are, because these guys, I mean, this is an offense that averaged around 300 yards passing per game, the last 3 years at SMU. Yet these quarterbacks are going late teens, early 20 rounds, maybe Chandler Morris.
Yeah.
And then you pick up Max Duggan as a handcuff a few weeks later. So I think a lot of people are nervous about this situation. You read the spring reports. It was like, all right, one day Chandler Morris is with the first team. The next day Max Duggan is with the first team offense. And it was just that way in terms of their performance too. Is one guy's doing well the first day and the next guy the other. So, do they have their guy right now? I don't know. We'll figure that out in the fall. If you want to invest in this offense, I'd say it's Quentin Johnston and maybe Kendre Miller in the later rounds of draft. I was actually looking at Kendre Miller a little bit more this morning, and that offensive line, I think, for TCU is going to be really good. Their center is an All-American or all conference candidate. They really like their one of their younger tackles. They brought over a 4-year transfer from SMU who's going to start immediately. So I think while they're figuring out the passing game, I think their running game should be at least kind of get them started, right? And I think Kendre Miller and now you like to mention this as well. We have clarity now with that backfield depth chart with Trelon Smith moving out and Amani Bailey now probably solidified as that running back too. So I'm interested in that running game as well.
So what's really interesting is the last best ball draft we did, you got Kendre Miller in round 16, which is really good value for that pick on where he's going. And just to give everyone an idea that do not have a copy of the preseason fantasy draft guide, we do have the results from the first two industry best ball drafts. And interesting enough, in that first draft, Max Duggan, I believe, went in round 18 or 19, and Chandler Morris in the second draft, I believe, was the first TCU quarterback at around 18, 19. So both of those guys right now, according to a lot of us that draft, if you want to get into a handcuff situation, both of those guys are still available after the round 15. So you don't really have to go up too early to get either one of them. And in like I said, in best ball situations, particularly in drafts like we had, you're probably looking at handcuff situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about Iowa State, Mike, where there is turnover at quarterback, but obviously the big question will be the running back spot, where Matt Campbell has been known for turning out fantasy monsters at running back. Brock Purdy's gone at quarterback, so we know he's going to be replaced. But, man, that running back spot at Iowa State right now, we're looking at Jarrell Brock eyeing that running back one spot. But by no means do you and I think that it's a lock that he, finishes out this season as running back one. There are some possibilities, looking elsewhere. But I think for the time being, you and I have Brock locked into that one spot for now, right?
For now, yes.
For now. I'm trying to use the words. I'm trying to use our words carefully here.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I would put the likelihood at close to 100% that we would use for now if we were doing this show 2 days before week 1, right? I think Jarrell Brock's going to start the season, and I think he's looked good at times in the backfield, but I know you don't look at the preseason magazines, but I think I texted you like all caps of wow after I read that Bill Steele has Cartavius Norton, the incoming freshman, as the running back one there. So I think in the earlier best balls that we were doing, and I would say with the best balls that we've done for the site, you've only seen Jarrell Brock being drafted. Now, I don't want to just say, because a magazine published Cartavius Norton as the starter that we all of a sudden now need to handcuff. But I think it would be good business to invest in a Matt Campbell running back one, because what have they averaged over the last decade? 1,200 yards, probably 14 touchdowns or something from the running back one. So you want to invest in this backfield. I think the offensive line is going to be better. Three starters back. One guy's flipping to his more conventional position. They're getting another starter back from injury that didn't play last year. So I think the offensive line will be better. So if I'm drafting Brock now, I am just playing it safe and handcuffing with Cartavius Norton.
And I think that's important. We talk about it all the time about how it's just easy when these programs have the returning starters like they had last year at Iowa State. And now you get to a situation, and, you and I also look at the schedule quite a bit too. So let's look at Iowa State's schedule to start the year. Southeast Missouri first game, right? They're probably not going to get a lot of competition, or we don't expect them to, right? So even if Brock does start, you would expect that one of the younger guys, if not a couple, are going to get some carries there. Then they go to Iowa, the second game of the year. There's a chance where the Iowa State running game really doesn't get off the ground right there, right? And so all of a sudden now you've got the following week with against Ohio, where you can see some rotation coming through. They follow that up with a home game against Baylor, who you and I expect to have one of the better defenses in the Big 12, right? So we've got Brock in that running back one spot. There's a chance Brock could stick as running back one for 3 or 4 weeks, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be any rotation. And I'll be honest with you, Mike, the reason why I haven't jumped on Brock this year so far in drafts is that I'm just a little concerned that once the Cyclones get 4 or 5 games down the line, then we might really truly see them settle into what the depth chart's going to be from that point on. And there's going to be some young guys that could get some carries. Right now, we know that Campbell loves to ride that running back one. But if two of those first 4 games, they struggle maybe at Iowa and home against Baylor and get that running game slow out of the gate, they're not going to be afraid to mix some guys in there, particularly if they know that they've got long-term potential out of some of those guys. And so that's my concern with Brock coming out of the gate. Sound fair?
same argument with DJU, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
I think there's pressure on both of those players. They need to perform immediately. And I mean, Matt Campbell, you could see in the quotes that he was talking about in the spring, like he was kind of putting pressure on Brock, like, hey, we like these guys, you know, Eli Sanders, Deion Silas, some of the guys in the backfield, along with Norton. So I think he needs to perform right out of the gate.
Now, with us saying that, let's not forget that Brock did start the bowl game against Clemson and didn't look bad. I mean, he looked actually pretty good against a solid Clemson defense. So I'm not knocking Brock, and I'm not saying it isn't going to happen, but there's there's a little bit of hesitation there because we're just not 100% sure yet, right?
Correct.
Now, over at Kansas State, we know what's going on in the backfield there. We were a little concerned about Deuce Vaughn and how he'd hold up last year, and that concern has just come and gone out the window, man. They bring in Adrian Martinez now from Nebraska, probably a better fit for him. There's going to be potential given his skill set in that offense. So that, for me, is the more intriguing piece at Kansas State, where it's pretty straightforward, right? You've got Deuce Vaughn, and now we're trying to decide where should we value Adrian Martinez in this offense. He's working with Colin Klein, who's a former fantasy great and quarterback of his own at Kansas State. So we'll kind of see what his influence will be with Martinez, and really if Martinez, with the offense that they run at Kansas State, is it a little bit more simplified so that he doesn't make the mistakes maybe, or can be a little bit more efficient than he was at Nebraska. You like Adrian Martinez a little bit more than me, but I think, a lot of that comes from my feelings about his performance over at Nebraska, right? But really, Mike, other than those two guys, are we really looking anywhere else at Kansas State?
Before I go into that, I'm very proud of you for not going on a expletive rant about Adrian Martinez being the Nebraska fan that you are. Probably caused you a lot of pain and frustration over the last 3 years.
Look, it's a different year, Mike. It's a different year. We're moving on. Adrian Martinez is no longer wearing red. So
yeah, I mean, with Adrian Martinez, I think I like him more than you, but I'm also not as close to the situation as you've been in the past. The offense is interesting because that you mentioned it, they bring in Colin Klein as the OC, and he kept mentioning, like, during the spring, that they want to play a little bit more up tempo. They're gonna definitely change some things there with the offense with him in charge. I was just looking back to where, he's always been around the Kansas State program, but when he was like an offensive assistant, so he wasn't calling plays or anything, but, they gave, like, the starters back in 2014, 2015, like Jake Waters, you remember those names, Joe Hubner. I mean, those guys were getting 150, 160 carries a season. And I mean, you can knock Adrian Martinez as a passer, but if he gets that type of rushing workload, you're looking at least 500 yards. You're looking at least 6 to 7 rushing touchdowns. And I'd say that is an absolute floor for Adrian Martinez. So, I like him this year. But yeah, to answer your first question, outside of Martinez and Vaughn, no, I'm not looking anywhere else.
The only reason why you and I have kind of gone a little bit back and forth on Adrian Martinez is just when you look at the Kansas State offense last year. I know there's a lot of people that might think, well, he's going from Nebraska to Kansas State, a little bit more of a run heavy offense, maybe a little bit more simplified offense, but really look back. And I mentioned this in the preseason fantasy draft guide in the write-up for Adrian Martinez. When you look at Kansas State's offense last year, I think they might have played one more game than Nebraska, but they only threw 31 fewer passes than Nebraska. So it's not like Kansas State doesn't throw the ball in that offense, right? So Martinez more than likely will be throwing the ball almost as much as he did last year at Nebraska. And
better or worse. Yeah.
Right. But the offense may be tailored for more towards his running style, where last year, a lot of his big plays at Nebraska were breaking out of the pocket, making big runs on called pass plays, where I think there'll be a little bit more design run calls for him this year. And, that kind of takes him off the hook a little bit with his decision making. So, yeah, this argument can be made both ways. And let's be honest, he's really Vaughn's a monster there. He's going to get his numbers. And really from there, it's just going to be how efficient can Martinez play. But I think we both agree that those are the two guys that we're targeting there for Kansas State, at least that most people should be targeting in their fantasy drafts. Now, there's going to be quite a few options over at West Virginia, where Graham Harrell has come over from after leaving USC to take over the offense at West Virginia. He recruits in JT Daniels, who he had a relationship with at USC, transferred to West Virginia after a stop at Georgia, right? You've got Bryce Ford Wheaton, who you and I are pretty high on as sort of the Mountaineers wide receiver one. You've got another option in Sam James. There's some options there in the backfield at West Virginia. So there's a few options here fantasy wise at West Virginia. Where are you kind of looking at? Give us a lay of the land at West Virginia, Mike.
Yeah, I've kind of changed my tune here just a little bit. I like the addition of JT Daniels at quarterback. I think just him being familiar with Graham Harrell, I think that should be a very seamless transition. I really like the wide receivers this year. There's a couple reasons. One, you just look back over the last few years under Graham Harrell, their top three wide receivers account for nearly 70% of the receiving production. That's a huge share of the receiving production. And that works with West Virginia, because I think we would agree that between Sam James and Ford Wheaton and Jaden Bray, that those are the top three going into this year. So, and I think there's some separations between the backups. So I think those are the top three. They're going to get, I would assume, between 60 and 70% of that target share. And to make another comparison to USC, I like this trio in comparison to what USC had in 2019, where you get Bryce Ward Wheaton's kind of the possession guy, similar vein to Tyler Vaughn's. You get the slot receiver. I'm not, and let me preface this by saying I'm not saying they're comparable talents, but just in the way that they're used, just kind of familiar from the spring game. Sam James in the slot with Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then where I'm changing my tune is I'm starting to like Jaden Bray a little bit more. You can get him at a value. I think in the last best ball, I got him maybe 5 to 6 rounds after Bryce Ford Wheaton. And I really see him in a similar vein to Michael Pittman Jr., a former 4-star, 6'4", 215 pounds. And if you watch the spring game, they were just chucking it to him deep and giving him the red zone shots. They're giving him a lot of jump ball opportunities, similar to Michael Pittman. So I really do. I'm still not changing wide receiver one, Bryce Ford Wheaton, but I would get some shares of Jaden Bray as well, because I spoke to the high target share with those guys.
I think looking back at Harrell's offense, I mean, the top three receivers can be fantasy factors. There's no doubt about that. Or are we just to ignore the running back spot? I know we've got Tony Mathison there. Harrell's offense will produce a decent fantasy running back if utilized properly. You've got Lynn J. Dixon still there. I know there's a lot of people still questioning whether or not he'll be a factor this year. We have Mathis sort of penciled in at that running back one spot, maybe feel he might be a better fit for the offense, but right now there's not a lot of attention being given to the West Virginia running backs in fantasy drafts, probably rightly so. And I think, to your point, from a value standpoint, there's the West Virginia running backs are going very late, if at all, in most of our drafts.
Last pick in your draft, if you want to draft Tony Mathis, who's the running back one, you're looking at 180 carries max in the system from the running back one.
So where we're not looking undervalue in running back, but have questions, is when we skip over to Baylor. We view them as one of the top programs in the conference right now. Solid defense. Blake Shapen's going to be at quarterback. Not much proven depth at receiver, if any at all, Mike, coming back. The strength's going to be in the defense and the running game for Baylor, right? Maybe the passing game between the quarterback and the tight end. Not a lot of proven at receiver. But you and I have kind of, gone with, looked at Tate Mcwilliams, Craig Williams, wondering, we were really high on Tate Mcwilliams in the beginning. We kind of came back and kind of brought those guys a little bit closer together, thinking there might be a little bit more parity in that backfield. we still like McWilliams, but we still feel there could be a little more parity in the backfield, at least to start off the year, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. Tate McWilliams still projected running back one.
Sure.
He fits the system, 211 pounds. This is exactly what Jeff Grimes looks for size-wise in his running backs. And, you just kind of watch him a little bit. He's got some tight hips. So, but I'm not sure, like, it's a specific style of running back that fits this system where you with the wide zone gap scheme, whatever it's called. Like it's vision is paramount. And he showed well in the spring game, but the what had me hesitant is that Craig Williams also looked pretty good running the football. He's had injury issues in the past. No surprise at 170 pounds soaking wet. So we bunched them together, I think, late in our projection process. So I'm not steering away from Tate McWilliams. I just have a little bit more hesitancy, and maybe we just see them kind of utilize just the same distribution that Abram Smith and Treston Ebner had last year.
Now, with that being said, keep in mind there's tremendous value in there if one of these guys break out, because we know they're going to put the ball on the ground, Mike. So there is huge potential for one of these guys, and we're siding with Tate McWilliams. All things considered equal, where we stand right now, if we're going to roll the dice, these are one of those picks where particularly in traditional fantasy drafts, where you might go get McWilliams a little bit earlier because of the upside in the offense. And if it doesn't work out, he's not going to be on your roster maybe 3 or 4 weeks later. But in an offense that is projected to be as run heavy as Baylor is, this is one of those where you if you really like him, you go up and you might be able to catch that upside.
Yeah. And I think, do we think that they're going to perform at the level of Abram Smith? No. But, you get 4 offensive linemen back this year from what was, they tailed off in the second half of last season, but what was a top 20 offensive line in the country last year. So I think it just sets up well for them to succeed, not at the same level, but this will be one of the better running games in the country.
Yeah. And now I can see where a lot of people were just kind of hoping we'd get to this point in Texas Tech, right, where Zach Kittley came over from Western Kentucky, and a lot of people wondering, is this going to be Western Kentucky 2.0 all over again? There's questions, right? I mean, we're looking at Tyler Shugg, probably the starting quarterback. I'm going to have some thoughts on that I'll go into a little bit. But the wide receivers are deep, right? We've got Miles Price, probably the most proven commodity coming back. You and I have him. I think both of us have him at least in our top 12 wide receivers. He's going early in a lot of best ball drafts, but there's other options there at receivers as well. So, we could spend a few minutes here. Where are the 1 or 2 points you want to start with Texas Tech, Mike?
It's semantics, but I disagree slightly on this wide receiver core being deep. It's just a mixed bag, and we don't know who that second guy is going to be aside from Miles Price. Start off with Miles Price. He's going to be wide receiver 1. Last 4 years, slot receiver under Kittley has been the wide receiver 1. That's established. Couldn't tell you who's going to be wide receiver 2. I don't think we got any indications during the spring. And I know after reading that Texas Tech was in the portal looking for potential replacements. So I'm not exactly sure that they're settled at wide receiver. And it's a big disparity of the last 3 years at Houston Baptist and Western Kentucky, you're looking at 73 receptions from the wide receiver 2. That first year that Kittley was at Houston Baptist, 29 receptions and 5 touchdowns from the wide receiver 2. Yeah. So while you could make the argument that you want to have, shares of maybe somebody else besides Price, maybe this offense doesn't take off as it did with Western Kentucky last year, and maybe you're just wasting a draft pick on a position of wide receiver 2 that's not settled at the moment.
Well, so first of all, I'll choose my words carefully next time, because they do have depth at receiver. The depth and quality depth are 2 different Correct. Things, yes. Right? So we know that they're going to be throwing the ball. We know the way the roster's built. Even look at Xavier White. Now, transition him back to receiver, possibly a former running back because of the depth they have in the backfield too. I don't know if that speaks to their running back depth or their lack of quality depth at receiver. And it probably is more of the latter, right? Or, so Xavier White going there. You've got Jaron Brandley as well, right? I've even seen like Trey Cleveland's name, but still no quality depth in regards to proven commodities, right? So what really makes this interesting and, somewhat similar to Western Kentucky last year, Mike, is that there might be some player that either they bring in or there's a player there that we're not giving a lot of attention to right now. We know what the offense can be, right? The question is whether or not we're going to know some of the names out of the gate other than Miles Price, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could also debate whether or not this offense is going to take off in year one because, they did it last year because Kitley had his almost entire Houston Baptist offense with them at Western Kentucky. That's not the case this year. He doesn't have, a 3-year starter in Bailey Zappi, that knows this system in and out as his starting quarterback this year. It's Tyler Shuck and Baron Morton at this point. And, who's to say it takes off like it did a year ago? I think again, smart business, I think, to invest in this system as we've seen. But yeah, I mean, you look at the numbers. You look at the numbers.
No, go ahead.
You look at the numbers in that first year at Houston Baptist, and they were, it was the wide receiver one that produced probably, I think, 70 some receptions. And then, like I mentioned, it was 30 receptions from the wide receiver two. I don't think it was much difference from the wide receiver three. So the personnel is not Houston Baptist moving over to Lubbock this year. Or Western Kentucky to Lubbock,
Yeah, I think, this was something you and I have spent some time on because I've got a couple of thoughts here before we move on. And, that system came in last year at Western Kentucky. Kitley came into Conference USA, which, that's not a great conference, but Western Kentucky did perform well against Indiana and Michigan State, very respectable numbers, right? So if he can do it there, he can do that against some Big 12 defenses. The one thing he had was unbelievable chemistry with players that knew the system, right? That's more of what we're, I think, concerned about this year, because here's my thought. There's a lot of, do we miss out on the next Bailey Zappi? And I know right now we have Tyler Shugg in that quarterback one spot. This was something that I talked to you about a number of times. I'm really worried about whether or not he's going to stick and this offense doesn't get turned over to Baron Morton at some point during the season, because I referenced the schedule. You and I looked at it. They open with Murray State, right? If they're undecided coming out of camp, there's a chance that maybe both guys get some playing time in that opener. Then they play Houston, which might be one of the top if not the top team in AAC this year. They go to NC State the following week. That's not going to be an easy game. NC State at least has a decent defense and they have a very good offense. Then they get Texas at home. Then they go on the road at Kansas State, at Oklahoma State. Mike, there is a really good chance that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a chance the Red Raiders can start here 1-6, 2-5. And then at that particular point, if you're not exactly grooving at a high level, you probably turn the offense over to Baron Morton at that point. And that's why I have not gone with Tyler Shugg in any of my drafts. You and I have talked about this, and I like to reference that beginning of the season. If we were sitting here and they were, they kind of had a cupcake schedule the first 3 weeks of the season, I'd feel much differently than I do right now. But given the way the schedule shakes out, for me, if they struggle out the gate, it almost feels like this has got Baron Morton mid-season written all over it.
Yeah, I remember watching a video from the Texas Tech beat writer right after spring camp concluded. And he was doing like a mailbag where subscribers were asking him questions. And the last question was, who's the quarterback to start the year and who's the quarterback to end the year? Put a gun to your head. And he said, Tyler Shuck is the starter opening week 1. He said, I'm going with Baron Morton to close the season. So,
yep. And I feel the same way. So, Let's hop over to Oklahoma State, where there's no concern at quarterback. Spencer Sanders is back again for a 62nd year in a Cowboys uniform. But, you know, wide receiver one there, outside receiver, there's some question marks there. It looks like we're going to get Dominic Richardson as the running back one out of the gate. Gundy has already been on record to say, hey, look, this guy's probably going to have to tote the ball, 15, 18, 20 times a game for us out of the gate. There's not a lot of proven depth behind him, although it is Oklahoma State. We know that they do have some talent on the roster. One, I'll ask you two questions. Well, three questions here, because I'm not going to go without giving you a Spencer Sanders one. You were high on Sanders a couple, or were you just maybe, will this final season of eligibility be it for him? Are we high enough or undervaluing Dominic Richardson? And do we have Jaden Bray pegged as we have Jaden Bray as that wide receiver one? How comfortable do you feel with that Jaden Bray as wide receiver one right now?
I'll start with the first one with my Spencer Sanders infamous top 5 ranking from a few years ago. Okay, I mean, look, system-wise, nobody is really better than Mike Gundy at producing fantasy studs at regardless of position. And you're telling me that I've got a high 4-star quarterback in Spencer Sanders, and this is hindsight, but you're telling me he can't replicate a top 5 season from a guy that had a hairline looking just like this and Taylor Cornelius? Like, come on. Other people were thinking Spencer Sanders could be top 20 good back, way back when. He's not anymore, of course, but I don't know. Spencer Sanders, I think of him the same way that I do in the last year as well, right? He's a top 30, 40 quarterback, and he'll give you 40 points a week, and he'll throw 40 interceptions the next. So I think he's a guy.
Newsflash, Mike, I have him 13 spots higher than you in rankings. So I do like Spencer Sanders this year.
I mentioned this in the last pod. These dual threat quarterbacks, pop in our projections. So it's just you want Spencer Sanders in a best ball format. That's end of discussion there. Sure. Jaden Bray, I'm very high on. Have been since last year. He caught a touchdown in the spring game last year. Oklahoma State reporting is really tough to come by for some reason, for a Big 12 school, but he had another big spring game. Just kind of reading the tea leaves there, he's the guy that most project to have a breakout season. So and you mentioned it too in kind of the opening there. It's always the wide receiver one under Gundy. It is always the wide receiver. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. Always the outside receiver that ends up being the wide receiver one under Gundy. That's been the case the last 8 years. Expect that to continue. And to close on Dominic Richardson, I think I sent you that video too. You listened during spring to Mike Gundy talk about Dominic Richardson. Now I'm going to read the quote. And you can take it one of two ways. It's interesting. He's like, they asked about Dominic Richardson. He's like, hey, he's a power back. He's going to grind out yards. Gundy said he'll have his hands full in that first game, carrying it 18 to 20 times. We love that. And then he said he doesn't have a choice. Now, we love that he's going to get the 18 to 20 carries in that opening week, and we'll see how he does beyond that. But, does it necessarily speak highly of him that Gundy says he doesn't have a choice to give Richardson 18 to 20 carries a game? Or is it just more speaking to the fact that there's no confidence in the guys behind Richardson, and he just has to lean on him because I got nobody else, right? So we'll see what transpires with Richardson. I'm interested to see because
the one thing that plays into Richardson's hand, and again, we're going to reference this as well, and this is really important coming out the gate, home game against Central Michigan to kind of kick off the year, right? So it's not like they're playing a solid P5 opponent. Then they get Arizona State at home. Arizona State, that program kind of in shambles. I'm sure they'll still maybe be decent this year, but Central Michigan, Arizona State, Arkansas Pine Bluff to start the year. The schedule is set that if Dominic Richardson comes out of the gates fast, he probably sticks at running back one for us all year.
Yep. Ollie Gordon, I know people are hyping him up. I did like the quote from Gundy that Gordon's around 230 pounds right now, and he's expected to run under a 4.6, which is enticing at that size, but doesn't sound like I mean, I don't think he was there in the spring, so I'd assume he's got some work to do to challenge Richardson.
Yeah, and just as a reference point, you and I have Richardson right around that 20 mark. So we view him as a top 20 running back going into the season, all things considered, the way the schedule shakes out, the potential early on, and a chance to stick. So take that for what it's worth. Now let's stick within the state, Mike, Oklahoma, where there were some changes as well, right? Many changes. And then Dylan Gabriel's coming over into that offense now. You've got Eric Gray that comes back. Is this potential for Marvin Mims to finally just have that breakout year that we've always wanted from him? You've got Javante Barnes coming in, the freshman running back as well. There's a bunch of different ways that we can go here. You and I, when you look at quarterbacks, we kind of have our top quarterbacks, and then Dylan Gabriel's like right at the next level, right? He's one of those guys that we feel is top 10 material. Where are you assessing this Oklahoma offense this year with Venables coming in and, taking over the team, and Levy coming over to take over the offense?
Yeah, I was slightly hesitant, but then I watched the spring game and we know Dylan Gabriel played with Jeff Levy at UCF, and you just watch the spring game and he was just zipping it all over the field. That offense was moving at a lightning pace, and that increased my interest in Gabriel in this offense, because I just think it's going to be a seamless transition for him in particular. Maybe the level of competition moving over from the AAC to Big 12,
sure,
proves to be a tough task for him. But this is an offense that just moves at a lightning fast pace. You're going to be top 10 in pace every single year. And, I think if properly utilized, Gabriel's got the weapons with a Marvin Mims in particular, because, he was barely on the field half the game of the offensive snaps. He's on the field under Lincoln Riley. I still don't know the reason for that, but hopefully this new coaching regime utilizes Mims to his potential, because I mean, he averaged 0.2 yards a catch last year, and what did he have, 50, 60 targets? Like, yeah. Imagine him getting 110 targets with his breakout ability, right? I think it's enticing to see what Mims might do this year in that offense.
And his chances, we'll find out very quickly as the Sooners open up with UTEP and Kent State to start the year. So two matchups that really give Oklahoma to show us what they are, who they're going to be, and establish that identity this year, and how the offense is going to look over the course of the season. And then, of course, we're going to end with Texas, Mike. Bijan Robinson, one of our top fantasy quarterbacks. Top fantasy running backs, if not the number one ranked running back. I know in your rankings, you've got Quinn Ewers that come in, a lot of hype for him around that passing game with Xavier Worthy coming back, Isaiah Nair coming in, Ajay Hall over there as well at Texas. So a lot of weapons that Sarkisian has at his disposal now. And I think for you and I, the big question, every time we kept putting Texas under the microscope and really looking at the offense, it was like we were starting with Quinn Ewers here. We were a little hesitant. No, he's not proven yet at the collegiate level. And then we're like, oh man, but he's got these weapons. We moved him up. He was a guy that kind of kept creeping up our list. He was creeping up our list the more and more we analyzed and looked at the Texas offense, right?
Yeah, it's a situation, I alluded to it with Spencer Sanders, where, the dual threats always kind of pop in our projections. Well, Quinn Ewers is not going to run. Sarkisian doesn't want to do that with his quarterbacks. So if you're a non-runner and you want to be a top 10 quarterback, we need you to throw for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. Like, that just has to happen. And for a guy, get it, all the arm talent in the world, 5-star prospect, but we haven't really seen you with the live bullets. in a game that matters. So there's a little bit of hesitancy with me there, in drafts with people that are they're already full on believers, right? So they're drafting them third, fourth round, have them top 10 picks. So, I just kind of look back with Sarkisian and some of his quarterbacks, averaging 29 fantasy points per game. He had Tua and Mac Jones, both finished inside the top 15. I think comparable to yours in the sense of that they're non-runners, and their touchdown to interception ratio was 74-6 or 74-7, I think, in 2 seasons, and they finished top 15. Like, Ewers needs to be he needs to, like I said, 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns to wind up a top 10 pick. So I'm intrigued, but I guess I'm not willing to go up to spend the capital that a lot of others are this year.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I know where I sit as well. And this was something that you and I talked about. I think with so much of the attention coming in, that's going to be defensively, people honing in on Xavier Worthy. I look at that Isaiah Nair acquisition of him coming in. I'm wondering if we're undervaluing him a little bit. There's so many weapons between Bijan and Worthy. I think he could be a little bit undervalued in this offense. This offense has potential to have 2 really good fantasy receivers in it. And I'm wondering, I think I'm a little higher on Nair than most, but my concern is that we're undervaluing him a little bit in an offense that seems to have weapons all over the field. I know they brought in Billingsley over from Alabama at tight end as well. So no shortage of weapons on the field. The question is can they put it all together?
Yeah, I think that's kind of my hesitation. I mean, I was going to talk on that. That's kind of my hesitation with even Xavier Worthy, is that you got Nair, who looked really good in the spring game. I think he's going to fit exactly what they are going to want Ewers to do. Like, what do you want Ewers to do? You want him to chuck it deep, right? That's Nair's specialty. Yep. Jordan Whittington still around. Ajay Hall, Josh texted me, Josh Chevalier, a friend of the site, and texted me and said, hey, he's looking good in summer workouts, so he could be a factor. So I was like starting to worry here. Like, I have a lot of shares of Xavier Worthy. Are there too many weapons here where he can't live up to his first round status? But then you just kind of look back over the years with Sarkisian, and he's got just countless top 20, multiple top 10 fantasy wide receivers that he's produced. So I think it bodes well for just Quinn Ewers that this offense, he's got so many weapons that it's tough to see him.
Yeah. I mean, and look, like you said, Nair coming in 6'3", about 218, 20 pounds around there. He got 12 touchdowns last year, which was more than the Wyoming offense had in 3 seasons from 2018 to 2020. So definitely talent coming in. The question is, can they put it together, and how will it be spread out, Mike? So that's going to do it for the Big 12, man. Look, we're 4 shows in. That's going to do it. The next time we sit down behind the mic, we'll probably jump into the MAC conference. We're still alternating big, P5, G5. So we're almost halfway home on these. And fortunately for you and I, there hasn't been a ton of attrition or transfers go in and out of the portal since we started doing these. That's always the challenge. We try to wait for the dust to settle as much as possible, but as well as I, in another couple of weeks, maybe even before we're even done this series, there's probably going to be some major transfer that either hits the portal or comes out of the portal. Don't you think?
Yeah, you're going to check Twitter after you finish this podcast, and there's going to be somebody transferring. It's just the way it goes.
Exactly. Well, look, that's it for the CFF site. My name's Joe DeSalvo, and for Mike Bainbridge, that's going to put a bow on the Big 12 conference in this preseason preview series. Next up, the MAC. We'll see you guys on the next show.